Chapter 3. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you, that it may be well with you? Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore, and anoint yourself, and put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor. But do not make yourself known to the man until he has finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies. Then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say I will do." So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and drunk, and his heart was merry, he went to lie down at the end of the heap of grain. Then she came softly and uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. He said, "Who are you?" And she answered, "I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer." And he said, "May you be blessed by the Lord, my daughter. You have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether poor or rich. And now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask, for all my fellow townsmen know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good, let him do it. But if he is not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning." So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, "Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor." And he said, "Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" Then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today."
I do hope this morning that you are blessed by what we do as we look into God's Word. And I don't know if you've been tracking along with us. We're working through this book called Ruth, and we're doing it with this series that we've entitled When Life is Hard. And what we just listened to was the entire 3rd chapter of the book of Ruth. So now, for those of you who have not developed the discipline maybe of reading your Bible, I need you to know in less than 3 minutes, you read an entire chapter of the Bible together. That's good stuff. If you're not reading your Bible at all, can you take 3 minutes in this next week and read 1 chapter? I think it's a reasonable expectation, because what we do, what we're about, all that we do as a church family is informed by this thing we call the Bible, which we believe is God's revelation to us. So one of the things we encourage is for everyone to be spending time on their own engaging with this incredible book of truth, of wisdom, of life, and of hope. But partially why we want to do is because we're not going to be going through each and every verse of this chapter this morning. We're going to be latching on to an idea. And so I wanted you to have kind of the context of this crazy story, right? For those of you who are in a relationship, maybe you've been married for many years, maybe you're new in the relationship. This relationship is not like our normal American relationships. This dating experience, how many of you, in order to get the interest of a guy, snuck into a barn where the guy had fallen asleep, probably after having a couple drinks, and while he's sleeping, you take his cloak over and expose his feet and just lie there very, very still? How many of you have tried that? If it's not working for you, maybe this is a tact. I don't know. But you have to understand, there's a whole different cultural thing. And for those of you who are more of the Bible nerds with me, you can look into the commentaries and the theologians and the people, and they have some crazy theories about this. There are some ideas that what it meant was that when she was uncovering the feet of Boaz, that was a euphemism for sexual activity. There's all kinds of stuff like that swirling around, like, well, what does this mean? I want you to know that in all the study I've done, I've looked at this for a good bit here, I don't think there is anything inappropriate going on. I don't think there is any kind of sexual deviance between the two of them, or like kind of under the cover of night doing things. This is the story of a woman who lays herself out vulnerable when she needed help. And I think that's really what we're going to lock on to this morning. Because we've said that when life is hard, I really just need to get a new clicker, because this thing just, oh, there we go, now it worked. When life is hard, what do we do? What do we do? When life was hard for Ruth, what did she do? Well, we're going to be talking about trust today. It's a tough thing. Because life is hard, and life has in some ways taught us not to trust. Perhaps in many ways, life has taught us not to trust. And if we look through the world, we see things that fall apart. As I was thinking through this idea, my brain went back to something that happened, I believe it was in the 4th grade, somewhere around there. I had a real good friend. He was my best friend. At that point, this is going to be hard to believe, I was an introvert. I know it's very hard to believe if you know me. I was very, very introverted as a kid. I was very content being by myself, watching Star Trek on syndication. I actually had one of those old Casio remote watch things, that you could, do calculator stuff on, and it had an alarm set every weekday for 5:55 p.m. Do you know why? Because at 6 o'clock, Star Trek came on, and I had to be there 5 minutes early to make sure I didn't miss any of it. All right? I was perfectly content with my one or two friends, and my best friend at the time, his name was Carrie. And in the course of being kids and being goofy, and you already know I like Star Trek, so I was kind of in that sci-fi world. Well, we started this pretend play game about these mythical creatures that were tearing through space-time and coming to get us, and we were finding evidence of them in the world, and we were going to defeat them if we found the right stuff. It was this whole thing, and went on for weeks. And then one day at recess, where we would come together and we would have this kind of convent of, let's talk it about, what do we need to do next? How are we going to defeat these intergalactic creatures? My best friend Carrie, and we had pulled one or two in, looked at me and said, we've been lying this whole time. We have just been trying to see who would be the biggest liar, and Brad, you're the biggest liar. My friends walked away. It might seem silly, and it was goofy, and it wasn't this world-changing thing, but I need you to know in that moment I was crushed. I had one friend, and he had been deceiving me for weeks, trying to see if he could make me out to be a fool, and he did, in front of these other kids. And I regressed at that point and said, I will trust no one, I will do it all on my own. I remember that internal conversation as a kid. And as fairly introverted, I didn't really express that outward. And obviously, God has done some different things in my life that I'm not so much of a introverted guy that doesn't talk about things anymore, right? So God has walked me through some stuff, but I remember the devastation in that moment. I thought in that moment, I can trust no one, because I had trusted this friend of mine explicitly. Maybe not in the same goofy sci-fi, 4th grade kid level. How many of you can relate to the idea that you've been let down by other people in your life, and maybe heard the idea that really shouldn't trust anybody? We've all walked through it. I want us to see that there is something different we need to look at. Something different I believe the Bible calls us to. So what we're going to do is we're going to look at a couple places in the story of Ruth where we see her pushing through this very same thing that all of us have to push through. Looking here in Ruth chapter 3, starting at verse 1, we see, then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, my daughter, should I not seek rest for you that it may be well with you? Okay? Should I not seek rest for you that it may be well for you? See what Naomi was doing. She's looking at Ruth and saying, I'm going to do good for you. Let me help you. And then proceeds to talk about Boaz here. Talks about where he's going to be and what to do. Naomi is providing guidance to Ruth. Now, Ruth could have done whatever she wanted with that. Okay? How many of you as parents have had kids where you've given them really good, rock-solid advice, and they go, okay. Any of you? Nothing from the front row here, okay? It's where my mother's sitting, okay? Where we give really, really, really good advice, and it's just utterly rejected, right? We've seen that. But Ruth, we see, follows through. She actually says, I'll do all that you say. And she goes and does this thing, this way of kind of catching the eye of Boaz. So let's hop down now in the story. And if you look at verse 11 of chapter 3, this is Boaz speaking to Ruth after this whole thing went down. He says, and now, my daughter, do not fear. I will do for you all that you ask. How many of you had people say that to you in your life? You ask them for something, they say, yes, I will do it. So just most of us have, but I'm not asking for a show of hands, but how many of you, after that's happened, have had people who have not made good on their promise? I'd suggest probably most of us as well. But Boaz here is saying, I will do everything you ask. And then he keeps on going, and if we keep reading down in verse 13, he's talking about this idea that there's a redeemer. And this is one of those ancient Israeli ideas that doesn't translate nearly as well in our culture as it did back then. But the idea would be, for instance, I have an older brother. He does not have any children of his own. If this is in the Israeli, ancient Israeli world, if he were to die, I would be on the hook to marry his wife and raise children in my brother's name for his family name. That I would be what's called a kinsman redeemer. I would redeem his family in that way. Anybody think we should bring that back and kind of do that in America? I'm guessing that might not work so well, right? So that was the culture of the day, but it was one of the ways that God had organized his people to say that people will be taken care of. In other cultures around the area, if a wife lost her husband with no children, she had no recourse, and most likely she would be in a world of destitution. God had organized his people in such a way that that would never happen, that she would be provided for by the covenant family. All right? So it's actually a pretty neat thing, even if it's pretty bizarre from our standpoint when we have different things going on. But that was the idea, and he was saying, hey, yes, I'm a redeemer, but there's a redeemer closer than I, which means it would be like if my brother died, for me, I'm his brother, but if there was a cousin, the cousin would be further down the line. So that's what Boaz is saying. He's more like the cousin, not the closer relative. So he said, hey, we got to see if he's going to do the job of kinsman redeemer. And he says, we'll ask him, but if he's not willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. I will redeem you. Powerful statement Boaz is giving us here, saying, I'm going to do everything you ask. I will step in. That's really what Ruth was asking. This wasn't this, like I said, this kind of weird sexual thing going on. When she came in, she was saying, will you redeem me? I lay myself at your feet. Will you step up and help me? And he says, I will do everything you ask. As the Lord loves, he's taking a vow. We don't really have the same vow structure in our American contemporary culture, but to say, as the Lord lives, and he's saying, that means I'm kind of putting myself under God's wrath if I don't do what I say. He's putting himself out there. And then if we keep going, looking here at verse 15, he says to her, bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out. So she held it out, and he measured out 6 measures of barley. Remember this, she had been there throughout the whole barley, and chapter 2 tells us the whole wheat harvest as well. The first kind of day she was working, she gathered an ephah of barley, which was about 48 pounds. Well, here, this is one of those, I'm just taking that little, again, Bible nerd, Bible geek thing. They're not sure exactly what the measures were. It doesn't say, and this was a way of speaking in the ancient world, if it was commonly known what would be given in a situation like this, you didn't actually have to say what the measurement was, okay? So it would be 6 of those, the things you know. Well, there were 3 common ones that probably could have been. It could have been the ephah, but that would have been 275 pounds. Ladies who maybe, wear like a long dress, do you think you could carry 275 pounds of grain in a dress? Chances are no. So the ephah is pretty much out. Well, there's another one called an omer. But an omer was like, I think it was a tenth or so of the ephah, which meant it would have only been about 28 pounds or so. Well, that's not very much. And it would actually be really a tenth of what she could have, or it's actually even, one omer is a tenth. 6 omers would be 28 pounds. So because of that would have been about half of what she gleaned in a single day that we learned about. So that's probably not it. So most of the commentators think that it was 6 seahs, which meant it was between 60 and 90 pounds of grain. Now, it would be difficult, and we're not talking about like a little skimpy sundress. She would have had more of like a tunic and things like that. But think about this young woman being sent back home carrying 60 to 90 pounds of grain in her dress. This was a significant gesture that he's doing. This was not just oh, hey, yeah, I'll call you. You know, it'll be okay. We'll see you down the road. It was, I'm making a significant gesture that I will make good on my word. Sends her with 60 to 90 pounds of grain. And it says that she went to the city. Then look at verse 18. This is where she's talking with Naomi, her mother-in-law, who gave her the good advice to start with. All right? Naomi says, wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today. She who gave good advice speaks of Boaz, who promised to do good, now says, trust in him. Believe that he will do this good thing. Now, as we see if you've read ahead, because some of you are overachievers, you probably know that the outcome is that Boaz does make good on his word. But at this juncture, she would have been at a point of tension. She would have had to say, am I going to trust him or not? Am I going to put myself out there? And I think the reality is that because people have let us down, it really can be traumatic for us to trust others. It can literally re-traumatize us. We can go through the same emotional experience when we open ourselves up to trust someone after we've been let down in significant ways in the past. And so one of the things I see in our world today, and I think it's something that's been throughout human history, is that we learn not to trust. In my days before getting into vocational ministry, I worked in the behavioral healthcare, mental health care field, and I was, one of the jobs I had was as a reactive attachment disorder specialist. Lots of big words. See, the mental health world does the same thing that the Bible world does. We try to come up with really big words for things, okay? But basically, this was young kids who experienced significant trauma in the first 2 years, somewhere in the first 2 years of their life, and they learn that they cannot trust people. And these kids sabotage everything in their lives. The kids that have this disorder try to knock everything down because it gives them a sense of control, because they have learned at such an early age that they cannot trust others. Now, most of us are not in that severe level of reaction. So any attachment that happens between me and another person, I will sabotage. But I've seen people just run through life not able to trust and really cutting themselves off from so much. I understand it. My difficulty with trusting people did not end with my story of my childhood friend. There have been many along the way, including a best friend later in life who cheated on my almost fiance while I was out of town, okay? It was traumatic. There have been others who have promised to do things, who have said, I will be by your side, and who not only have not been by my side, but who have turned out to be actively seeking destruction in my life. And the thing is, I am not alone. I know the trauma that can come with even thinking about trusting others. But here's what I've learned as well. That being vulnerable, and trust me, believe me 100%, this is an act of vulnerability. To be vulnerable enough to trust again shows a strength and an agency like nothing else, and it opens us up back to hope. That we are able to step and engage hope that God wants for us, that a lack of trust closes us off to. And it starts with understanding, one, who God is, what he's done, and what it means to trust him. Because when I can learn to trust God, it means that I can rely on something beyond myself, that there is one who is always in my corner, and because of that, I can begin opening myself up to trust others again. The thing is, probably every one of you in this room right now, everyone who's watching online, could have a sit down with me and say, but you don't understand. You don't understand how badly I was hurt. You don't understand how traumatic my breach of trust was. You don't understand. Yeah, that might be true for anybody else, but not for me. Here's the thing. I love you all, but you're not that special. And by that I mean, we are all traumatized by this, and we can all step back into hope. It is vulnerable, which means you could get hurt. By trusting others, I am not giving any guarantee that if you just follow these whatever steps, that you will never get hurt again. That's not true. Trusting requires vulnerability. But when we wall ourselves off so strongly against others and not trusting, we wall ourselves off from the hope and the joy and the contentment and the peace and the happiness that God does want for us. So yes, I'm asking you to do a risky thing, but when you do that risky thing of trusting again and starting the process, it actually shows a strength and an agency for yourself, being one who is taking control of their life, saying, I will no longer keep my heart and my soul shackled because of what someone else has done to me. It is actually a stepping into freedom and showing that you have power over those things. It's a process. It doesn't happen all at once, but it's something I believe God calls us to. And what I would suggest is that there are some things in the Bible that we can look at that will show us how to do this. I would suggest this: when life is hard, we need to trust trustworthy people. Now, that might sound nice and pithy. How do I know who's trustworthy? It takes time, it takes wisdom, it takes a lot of things. But this is the process. This is what Ruth did. She trusted both Naomi and Boaz to do and be who she had seen them be in the days before. This is what she did. She trusted trustworthy people as part of what it means to navigate through the hardness that this life brings. So in order to do that, I want to suggest this. First, that we need to find wise counsel. We need to not think that we are the smartest things that have ever graced this green earth and trust others to speak into our lives. That is part of trusting trustworthy people. In Proverbs chapter 11, we read these words: with his mouth the godless man would destroy his neighbor, but by knowledge the righteous are delivered. By knowledge, the righteous, when you have the right knowledge, that leads you into this idea of deliverance, being delivered from the bad things. Verse 14 then, where there is no guidance, a people falls, but in an abundance of counselors, there is safety. Now, the character of the counselors matters. And there's a story in the Old Testament of a king who took the throne after his father. His father had done some great things, and he asked his king's advisors, what should I do in establishing my reign and moving forward? And they said, hey, your father drove the people hard. Give them rest. Don't drive them as hard, and they will love you for it. He goes, oh, okay. Well, that's nice. And he asks his friends, hey, buddies, what should I do? And they go, oh, you need to tell the people, if my father drove you with whips, I'm going to drive you with scorpion tails. I'm going to give it to you harder. It's going to be so much worse because I'm so much tougher than my dad. That's what you need to tell him. And this young king goes, yeah, I like that one. I'm going to go with that. And it actually ended up dividing the ancient nation of Israel into two kingdoms. It split the nation because the advice he took was not wise counsel. He had lots of people around him, but the character of the counselors mattered too. If you want to trust trustworthy people, you got to figure out who's trustworthy. There's no guarantee, but there's this thing called a track record. Okay? You can look at the content of a person's life and kind of how they've interacted before and how they've interacted with you and see, hey, is this wise? But also it means don't just have that one buddy you go to all the time and get that advice. Ask multiple people from multiple vantage points who have multiple viewpoints. This is going to be a tough one for some, I'm sure. This applies in so many ways. It applies to the news. No one in here should watch only Fox News or only CNN or only the BBC or only any of them. You should watch all of them. Because while we're trying to find trustworthy people, we have to understand even the trustworthy people are fallen, which means we've messed up, we're sinful, and we need other perspectives, other ways of looking at it. We have to seek wisdom amongst the counselors. That's one of the things. So yes, we need to find wise counsel. We need to get that knowledge so we can be delivered by it. But we also need to pursue help. Again, this is a tough one for us in our American culture many times because we think that we just need to be strong enough on our own. A number of things I read on various social engagement platforms. Well, you just need to be tough enough, or I'm going to get this. And I understand some of the sentiment behind those things, but at the end, none of us are smart enough, none of us are strong enough, none of us are good enough. All of us need help because we were not designed to do it alone. If you look back to the very first book in the Bible, Genesis, where it talks about how God created the earth and how he fashioned things, after saying all this stuff was good, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good, he gets to man and he says, it is not good that the man should be alone. Catch that? Hey, it's good. Hey, it's good. I created this. It's good. I created this. It's good. I created this. It's good. Hey, man. Oh, he's good. He's very good. But him being alone is not good. So what's God's response? Looking at man being on his own, trying to do it. And remember, this is before sin entered the world. This is even in that perfection kind of place that Adam was in at this point of the story. It's not good for him to be alone, even outside us. And he says, I will make him a helper fit for him. And we don't have time to go down this incredible rabbit hole, but this is a powerful verse. That word helper is eber. And it's only used of people once in the Bible, right here. Every other place it's used in the Bible, it's used of God himself. That God is the eber of man. That God is the helper, the sustainer, the equipper, the completer of the incompleteness of man. But he actually creates people to do that for people. That we were designed from the very beginning to be needing help and to help. So we need to pursue it, not thinking that it is a moral failing in us that we need help. We need to be willing to ask for help, just like Ruth did to Boaz. She went to him and said, I need your help. I can't do it on my own. Well, in addition to the wise counsel and the pursuit of help, we need to avoid old traps. I promised my wife when this happened last night that I had already written this part of the message, and so it wasn't because my dog did it yesterday. But this is one of the greatest verses in all of the Bible. I hope you're ready for it. This is Proverbs 26. Like a dog that returns to his vomit is a fool who repeats his folly. I don't know if many of you have dogs. We have a dog. First, we got it from my wife. Honestly, it was her practice run before we had kids to see if she could keep something alive. Okay? We figured it was less of a moral failing if a dog died under her care than if a child did. So it was a trial run, okay? So the dog was purchased for my wife, but he quickly became my dog. And I love my dog. Every night, he hops up on the bed, hops up on my chest, and gives me little kisses before I give him his neck scratches, and then he goes and lays down. Every single night. For the last 10 plus years of my life, this dog has done that. Last night, getting into bed, my wife goes, oh, don't let the dog lick you. I'm like, okay. Yeah, he got into some raw chicken I had thrown away, and he threw it all up, and before I could get to it, he just ate it again. I'm like, gross. But all right, God, you do want me to do this verse. We can look at it and say, that's really gross. Why would a dog do that? Because it's stupid. The raw chicken made my dog sick. Okay? He ate it. Gross, right? Okay, hope none of you have too strong of a gag reflex there. Sorry. It's back on the ground, like, oh, that made me sick. That clearly wasn't something good to eat. That's partially digested, I'll eat it again. Right? Terrible idea. That's what the Bible says a fool does. He just does the same thing. He makes that mistake and, faces the consequences and then does it again and again and again. In trusting trustworthy people, we have to avoid the traps of listening to counsel, of pursuing help from those who are not trustworthy. I can't tell you how many times I'll sit down with people who will share the devastation they're in, and they can link it to, I was with these people, and we ended up doing this really stupid thing. And sometimes it's just stupid, and sometimes it's stupid, right? And I spent jail time as a result. And yet, as we're walking through life, I'm trying to be there with them. Who are they hanging out with again? The same people. They're getting advice from the same bad actors that they knew before had provided bad counsel and had led them in bad ways, and yet they return to it time and time again. If we're really serious about finding help, of making it through when life is hard, we need to trust trustworthy people, which means we do have to avoid the old traps of listening to those who will bring the same disorder and dysfunction into our lives. And I'll tell you, I've seen it with people who are even seeking romantic relationships. It's they'll be with someone and they know they're not the right person, but they love them and they're attractive and they're this and they're that, and then all the junk hits the fan, right? All the bottom falls out, and then they're broken, and we try to come alongside and I've learned my lesson, right? I'm going to, and then a few months down the road, it's, oh, hey, yeah, we're back together. Or, oh, yeah, I'm dating somebody. And it's like, wow, they're literally a clone of the last one. I see this again and again and again, that we keep returning to those old traps that bring pain and dysfunction into our lives. God wants us to learn from our mistakes. He does not shame us for our mistakes, but he does expect us to learn from our mistakes. So in seeking wise counsel and pursuing help, you got to avoid the traps of going back to those same broken cisterns, as the Bible talks about, where water should be, but it's absolutely dry. We need to find the true trustworthy people in our lives. And lastly, we need to build community. All right, build community. This is something that we've talked about a lot at Grace Church, something that's core to who we are. It's one of our central beliefs that people grow better together, that one of our values here are authentic relationships, because out of that we feel that it is the best context to help people live Jesus-centered lives. And we've learned that the Jesus-centered life is the thing that brings all the pieces of life together in the way they were designed to be. Now, there's lots of places we go. In Acts chapter 4, which is a recounting of the early church, listen to these words. It says, now the number of those who believed were of one heart and soul. They were unified. And it says that no one said that any of the things that belonged to him were his own, but they had everything in common. Down to verse 34, it says, there was not a needy person among them, for as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid it at the apostles' feet. And look here, it was distributed to each as any had need. Now, what I'm not trying to suggest from this is that we should kind of form a socialistic commune where there is no property rights or individual. I'm not going there. But the Bible does talk about this, that as the early church came together, there was a communal nature of caring for one another at expense to yourself. And really the idea was that as you had access, as God had blessed you with access, you brought it for the good of others, whether that was in physical assets, the material stuff, or through training. There was a whole system of what was called patronage in the ancient world, where whether it was by your reputation, the skills you could transfer, or goods themselves, that you would be bringing blessing to those who didn't have. And this is what the early church was manifesting, that because we had unity, one heart, one soul, that we would make sure that we would take care of one another. And where do we go when life is hard? I want to suggest that we need to have community like that. Community that's willing to be trustworthy and to trust. To act this way and to be this way and to seek it from others. So here are those four things again. The four things that I think, they're not exhaustive, but if we're really going to trust trustworthy people, we need to find wise counsel, pursue hope. We need to avoid the old traps that we've stepped through, and we need to do it in the context of building community. Not only being part of it, not only participating, but literally building it. We've said this several times now, that life is hard, but God is greater. Why can we trust others? I want to suggest we can do that because we've learned that we can trust God, that he has shown up and that he is building among his family those who will reflect him, reflect his character and his nature. Life is hard, and we said that we want to use this time to discover hope in the midst of the storm, to discover hope where there seems to be only dark places. I want to leave you with 3 questions. And in fact, if you're part of one of our life group communities, your life group leaders will have these this week as well to go over with you. And if you're not, I encourage you to do it. It's a wonderful opportunity to do the very things we're talking about, to develop those relationships and learning how to trust trustworthy people. But I want to leave you with these 3 questions, things to ponder when it comes to the need to trust others. First of all, what do I need to do to find trustworthy people? Are you surrounding yourself with those who are worthy of your trust? Are you in a place of building community? Are you part of a life group? Part of those relationships where you can find those trustworthy people. But also, what do you need to do to actually trust trustworthy people? What's getting in the way? We already talked about the fact that it takes vulnerability. We've mentioned that it is a risky thing, but that it is such a good thing. When you start to do it, you can do the very things that Ruth did that set her up to enter into the blessing that God had for her. And then lastly, what do you need to do to become a trustworthy person? If I were to ask your colleagues at work, your peers at school, maybe your family members or even your spouse, and say, hey, is this person trustworthy? What would they tell me? And if I said, how do you know that? How would they be able to give me evidence that you're a trustworthy person? I hope and pray that would be the clear answer for all of us, that yes, we're trustworthy. But oftentimes I think because of how we've been wounded, we don't always set ourselves up to be that person of trustworthy resource to others. What do you need to do to be a trustworthy person for others? What do you need to do to trust trustworthy people? And what are you doing to find them? This is my encouragement to you.